he came to our table and we introduced ourselves. We're the Plain English Foundation, and the response was, "Great, I really need to talk to you guys." And thereafter, we had a very fruitful conversation. He invited us in, and we had a long meeting at which he agreed very kindly to come along and to launch our event today. He has some very strong feeling about plain English and plain language, and he's going to share that with you today. And I would ask you to join me in giving a very warm welcome to the Premier of New South Wales.
Thank you very much, Neil. Distinguished visitors, guests and friends, and particularly those of you from interstate and overseas, welcome to Sydney, the gateway to Australia. Welcome to New South Wales. Let me begin with a plain statement in plain English. Thank you for inviting me to your conference. Or, it's appropriate at the outset to record very significant levels of interpersonal gratitude and relevant appreciation. We want to facilitate a meaningful, values-driven contribution to your proceedings. I exaggerate, but not a lot, and you know that I'm not exaggerating a lot. It may be significant that when that sentence was typed into the computer that we didn't get a wavy green line in it. So standards are certainly on the wane when computers let us down. But it is good to be amongst you as champions and as defenders of good plain English. You think you're alone, don't you, before you meet other people like yourselves? You think that you're out there identifying this turgid nonsense that we have to wade through. But you see a room like this and we're not alone. I see one of the sessions for later this morning by a gentleman, Chris Bamford. Is Chris here? Yep. Yeah. Titled Toxic Communication. I like that. Your conference theme is raising the standard, and by raising the standard of English expression, we're doing more than simply making our own government documents easier to read. We're raising the standard of government because clear English makes for clear thinking, and clear thinking makes for better decision making, and all the benefits that come with it. Improved delivery of services, improved transparency, cost savings where appropriate, and in the long term, a healthier, more responsible and responsive democracy. In New South Wales, with the support of the Plain English Foundation, we've seen a lot of progress in a number of our key agencies. In Treasury, the drafting time for documents has been reduced by half through adopting plain English principles. At Sydney Water, the time spent by management editing documents has been reduced by some 40%. And at the Audit Office, client satisfaction is up by 92%. So all positive signs, but much more to do, and I'll have more to say about that shortly. It's not just governments and the bureaucracy which have developed a culture of using language to create ambiguity, to distract or even to hide the true intent or meaning. I guess one of the points I would make is that it doesn't matter how passionate you are about the use of plain language, you have to constantly be on your guard. All of us are overworked, all of us have to do a lot of reading, many of you will have to do a lot of writing, and it's easy to slip into the sorts of language that we're railing against. The synergies, the enhanced customer experiences, the outputs, the innovations, the strategies, the capacity building. You have to guard against this stuff. Don Watson, as one of the great warriors in the cause of plain English, has pointed out that this disease that we have to guard against has infected academia and the professions and, of course, the language of corporate management. A culture that can turn people into human resources, clearly a worry. In Don's words, and I quote from his book, Death Sentence, The Decay of Public Language, and if you haven't read it, please set aside a time to read it. His frustration leaps off the page at you. Quote, "There have been signs of decay in the language of politics and academia for years, but the direst symptoms are in business, and the curse has spread through the pursuit of business models in places that were never businesses. Universities that once valued and defended culture have swallowed the creed whole. Libraries, galleries and museums, banks and welfare agencies now parrot to it. The public sector spouts it as loudly as the private does. They speak of focusing on the delivery of outputs and matching decisions to strategic initiatives. In an education curriculum or the mission statements of an international fast food chain, you will hear the same phrases." End quote. That's vintage Don. Among other Australian writers, he's joined by Clive James, another great fighter for good English. Now, both of those gentlemen are beneficiaries of an English literary tradition in which the models of plain English prose in the 20th century were the writings of Bertrand Russell and George Orwell and J.B. Priestley and the historian Paul Johnson. And Johnson's advice to writers some quarter of a century ago has lost none of its force today. Beware, he wrote, of what I call bow-wow words. These are words which in effect say keep off to intruders and are used by bureaucrats, politicians, educationalists, economists and other groups in real or supposed authority. He went on to list some examples. Programming, cost-effective, counterproductive, pluralist, optimum, utilise, ongoing, orientation, parameters, structured, unilateral, growth point, potential, significant, environment, dialogue, and a great many others. But it's not enough to simply avoid bureaucratic jargon. Plain English, if it's to serve the objectives we seek for it, must also be good English. And clarity of expression isn't just a matter of simplifying the vocabulary or of resorting to a kind of facile colloquialism that may in fact be no clearer than the original. And it's not simply a matter of brevity alone, otherwise Twitter and Facebook would be the providers of exemplary submissions to government. And the story is told, and no doubt there's a few versions of it, but the story is told of how Winston Churchill once asked an official at the Admiralty to summarise on a single sheet of paper the condition of the British Navy. The Admiralty official simply said, "That's impossible." "Really," says Churchill, "I could do it with just one word. It's good or it's bad. Anything beyond that is a lot of useless detail." Now, I'm attracted to that. Now, Churchill was one for exaggeration, but he was also a master of the language. He understood that the best plain English requires a thorough grounding in basic literacy, and that must start in our schools. It must start with the teaching of grammar. And I don't mean that plain English requires a strict observance of every grammatical rule, a point that Clive James, for example, has argued. He's a stickler for good grammar and has written widely in support and praise of it. But in his latest collection of essays, he makes the point that grammar isn't everything. Bad writing, he tells us in The Revolt of the Pendulum, often doesn't need bad grammar to make it awful. It can be awful even while keeping all the formal rules. A perfectly bad sentence, indeed, can be an intricate miracle of ostensibly correct construction. End quote. What is required is a good working knowledge of grammar and a respect for the disciplines that good grammar instills. Economy of language, precision, consistency and a logical structure.